a large percentage of the Old Testament is written in poetry. Psalms, Proverbs, Job, even the prophets themselves all preach their messages in poetry. So understanding Hebrew poetry is helpful if you're going to read the Old Testament well. Where English poetry is defined by rhyme and meter very often, Hebrew poetry is defined more by the structure of the text. And often I like to think of it as rhyming the meaning rather than rhyming the sound. With an inflected language, rhyming is not real hard because masculine endings always rhyme and feminine endings always rhyme. And so in Hebrew, more often you rhyme the sense of the passage. One of the ways this is done is in parallelism. The first and probably the easiest to see is a synonymous parallelism. This is one of the things that gives the Bible the reputation for repeating itself quite a bit. This is when the second line of a stanza actually says basically the same thing as the first line. So in Psalm 8:4, what are human beings that you are mindful of them, mortals that you care for them? Or Psalm 19:1, the heavens are telling the glory of God, the firmament proclaims his handiwork. So we have the second part of the verse says the exact same thing as the first part of the verse. That's known as a synonymous parallelism. There's also an antithetic parallelism. An antithetic parallelism is when the second line uses a contrasting thought to the first line. Very helpful if you're going to do wicked and righteous conversation. So Psalm 1:6, the Lord knows the way of the righteous, but the way of the wicked will perish. Or Psalm 37:9, for the wicked shall be cut off, but those who wait on the Lord shall inherit the land. So you have that comparison between where instead of saying the same thing, they're saying contrasting things. The third kind of parallelism may be the hardest to see. It's the synthetic, or I prefer stair-step parallelism. I like calling it a stair-step parallelism because it helps me remember what it means. It's when the second part of the stanza further develops the line of the first. So this can either be a rewording, like Psalm 95:3, the Lord is a great God, a great King above all gods, where it's not exactly the same thing, or say something like Proverbs 25:18. Like a club, sword, or sharp arrow is one who bears false witness against a neighbor, where the second line actually completes the thought of the first in the way in which it's put together. So that's synonymous, antithetic, and stair-step are the most popular of the parallelisms, and some that you're going to probably notice most obviously as you're reading. A couple of other features of Hebrew poetry to be aware of. Chiasms are, a chiasmus is very occurs pretty regularly. You can see them there. A chiastic pattern is when you go through an order of elements and then you reverse the order as you go when you finish. So it would be A, B, C, C, B, A. And you can use that in concepts, you can use that with words, but it sets up a sort of a chiastic pattern in interpretation. Similar to that, but a little bit different, is something known as an inclusio. An inclusio is when you open and close a passage in exactly the same way. So Psalm 8 has an inclusio, O Yahweh, our Lord, how majestic is your name in all the earth, opens and closes Psalm 8. There's an inclusio between Psalm 1 and 2, where the very first word in the first verse of Psalm 1 and the last verse of Psalm 2 both open with the word ashrei, or happy, or blessed. So you have that inclusio there. Now, there's also going to obviously be metaphor, there's also going to be personification, there's going to be a lot of other elements that you would normally associate with poetry, but these are going to be some that you want to look at. One final, somewhat popular aspect of Hebrew poetry is the acrostic. An acrostic is when you get lines or groups of lines that begin with successive letters of the Hebrew alphabet. So Psalm 25, Psalm 34, Psalm 111 and 112, these are all acrostic psalms. In other words, the lines actually begin Aleph, Beit, Gimel, Dalet, Hey, right through the Hebrew alphabet. Sometimes you can do a couple of verses. The great acrostic psalm is 119, where 8 verses at a time start with the same letter from the alphabet as it moves through the psalm. So maybe it aids in memorization, and maybe it's just showing off talent. The amount of structure and discipline required to write an acrostic is pretty impressive. So don't know exactly what the purpose was, but it does make a very impressive poem. All of these elements of Hebrew poetry we're going to be aware of as we're looking at the prophets and the Psalms and other texts in the Hebrew Bible that structure themselves according to poetry.